What's up, guys? So about a month ago I unboxed this hoverboard here, and I actually have an unboxing video on that if you're interested. But shortly after I got this, I just had the idea that it would be really cool and hilarious to put this in the back windshield of my car. So as I'm driving around and as I'm passing people, they actually see this hoverboard in my window. This hoverboard is such an iconic movie prop, and Back to the Future is such a huge movie that just about anybody identifies with it throughout the multiple generations. I thought it would be hilarious. So I would put this in the back of my car, but there's two problems with that. First of all, it's fairly heavy. It weighs about 4 pounds or so, and in the event of an accident, I really don't care to have 4 pounds of plastic hurtled at my head. Second of all is I really like this board and I want to keep it nice. So if I put this in my back windshield, the sun is going to beat down on it and it's going to get faded, and it may even degrade the plastic. So what I'm going to be doing today is making my own replica of this prop, and it's just going to be foam. It's not going to be as accurate as this. It doesn't have to be, because it's just going in my back window. But I'm going to show you how to do that today. Okay, so here's my disclaimer. I am not a hoverboard building expert. In fact, this is my very first attempt to even build a hoverboard of my own. So bear with me, but I have an idea and I think I know how to make it work. Before I actually get started, I'm going to need some materials, and I am going to need, first of all, these decals. I just printed these out. I went online, did a Google search for hoverboard decals, and I was able to find a PDF file which I was able to modify in Photoshop and print out. So this is what I'm going to use for the top and bottom of my board. I have duct tape. This is hot pink duct tape. You can find this at Home Depot or any craft store. I am going to use several adhesives. I have spray adhesive here, and I also have liquid nails, just because this is the only thing that I have right now. Contact cement would be a very good alternative if you have that. Also, Elmer's glue should work. I'll need some sandpaper or a sanding block, scissors, and razor blades. I have a couple razor blades to cut my foam. To mount it inside of the car, I will be using fishing line and some zip ties. So those are going to come later. I also have a yardstick, a ruler, and a Sharpie to do all the measuring and marking on my foam board. And lastly, what the board is actually going to be made out of is this foam board right here. Now, I purchased this from Hobby Lobby. This foam board I have only been able to find at Hobby Lobby. Most foam board is about a 1/4 inch thick, whereas this foam board here is actually a 1/2 inch thick. It is 20 inches across by a 1/2 inch thick by 30 inches tall. Now, this foam board is actually what I made my rear diffuser out of, so it is very durable if you do it right. So with that being said, I'm going to get to building this. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is to cut out my decals. Okay, so now that I have my decals cut out, I want to separate the top decals from the bottom decals for the board. Now this is easy to do because all the top pieces are going to have yellow on them, where the bottom does not. So now that I have my decals cut out, the next thing I'm going to do is grab my foam board, and I'm actually going to lay out my decals on top of the foam board so I can see how big they are. While I'm doing this, I'm also making sure that all the patterns line up like they should. So now that I have these lined up and I'm comfortable with how they look, and I made sure that all the lines and the patterns match up, you're going to grab your tape, which I forgot to mention, but you're going to need Scotch tape, and I'm going to flip these over and tape up the back of the seams. Now you could check to make sure that they're aligned. If you put this on top of your white foam board, you will be able to see through the paper slightly and make sure that the pattern is correct on the opposite side. Next, I'm going to move this off to the side, and I'm going to take my bottom piece, I'm going to flip it upside down, and I'm going to slide it over to one side of my board. Now I'm going to use this as my template to trace out with my Sharpie for where I'm going to cut. Now, if you line it directly up on an edge and a bottom corner, assuming that it's good and solid and it isn't bent or nicked or damaged in any way, that saves you from cutting out two sides. Now, I say use the bottom and flip it over for two reasons. First of all, in my situation for this board, you're never really going to see the bottom because it's going to be strapped into my car. Secondly, by flipping it over, if I do accidentally write on it a little bit, it's really not going to show through to the other side. So now that I have my first board cut out, I am going to double the thickness, and I am going to use this as my template. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to take both boards and I'm going to glue them together. Now if you have contact cement, you could just put that on each side, wait till it dries and stick them together. I do not have contact cement at the moment, so I'm going to be using some of this liquid nails, and I'm going to be using clamps to clamp them down so that it stays. But if you're using contact cement, you should not need clamps. So now that this is done setting up, I'm going to take off the clamps and I'm going to start sanding all the edges so that both boards are perfectly lined up and that the edges are smooth. Now, before this board is finished, I will be wrapping it in duct tape, but I don't want the tape to be doing all the work. I do want some glue in between both boards as well. And now that I'm finished sanding, I am going to wipe this down with a damp paper towel just to get all the dust off, because I will be using duct tape next. Now I'm going to take my duct tape and I'm going to wrap the edges one time. Okay, so now I have the two boards glued together and I have duct tape wrapped around. Next, I'm going to place my decals on here, make sure that they fit like they should, and then I'm going to glue them down. And I'm going to spray this adhesive, the spray adhesive, and I'm going to take it outside to do this because if you've ever used this stuff, it's sticky and it gets absolutely everywhere. So if you are using this, I recommend doing it outside. So that part is going to be off camera, but I'll come back and I will have my decals on the board. So both sides of my decals line up properly and everything looks good. So like I said, I'm going to spray this down with spray adhesive and I'm going to stick my decals on. Now if your decals don't line up perfectly, if the edge isn't perfectly smooth or you have a little bit of, you know, excess pink or anything like that here, don't worry about it, because this step that I just did with the duct tape, I'm going to repeat on top of my decals once they're taped down. So I'm back. I just glued my decals front and back to the board. Now I did want to mention that in the movie, the back portion of the board does have a curve to it, as you can see. But I chose not to replicate this curve. It just is not worth it for me and what I'm using this board for. Like I said, this is going to be in the back of my windshield, and it's really not that critical that it's 100% accurate. So if you're making one and you want to put a curve in it, you could definitely do that, but I chose not to. So at this point, I am going to go around the edges once again with duct tape. Now, since I already have my decals down, I want to make sure that I don't cover them up. So the first time I did the duct tape, it really didn't matter too much, but this time I'm going to do it in sections, and I'm going to make sure that I only overlap a small portion on the top. On the bottom of the board, you're never going to see it, so I really don't care. Now, if your decals stick over the edge of the board a little bit, that's okay. Just trim it, because whenever you go around with your duct tape, it's going to cover it up anyhow. So here's the board. It is now completed, and all I have to do is mount it in my car. Now, to mount it in my car, I'm going to use fishing line, and I'm going to punch holes through this board and run the fishing line through so that you don't have ugly zip ties showing on the surface of the board. I'm going to use the zip ties to attach the fishing line to my car. So I'm going to take a thumbtack to punch holes through here, and I'm going to run through a paper clip so that it goes all the way to the other side. Now, when I'm doing this, I want to put it in places that is inconspicuous and isn't really going to show too much. Okay, so I have my hoverboard right here, and this is what I was talking about with the fishing line. What I did is I poked 4 holes, here, here, and here, and here, and I ran 20-pound test fishing line through 3 times, and that allows me to connect zip ties. Now, I actually have, for my suspension, the extenders, adjustment extenders for the rear, and there's also a little hook in here in the center that I'm going to attach this to. So I'm going to leave these zip ties here, and then I'm going to run down 2 more zip ties to connect these to those. And there you go. So now I have my hoverboard back here. I think it's going to be hilarious. The only downside is I do get a bit of a reflection on the rear glass, but I don't think it's going to be that bad, and I'll show you from the outside.